This is me trying to go through all the story missions from the things that I missed by joining this game late. And I want to start with the ones that give us some guns right up front, and start with the oldest ones and work our way forwards from there. I was going to start with Medved Taiga, but it's just a reskin of a 12 gauge shotgun, which we already have. I also had the idea of just like starting at the very, very beginning. But one of the things I want to do is highlight the history of each of these locations and settings come with a lot of the rich history around them. This is Spain. Spain has a long, long history. For anyone who studies European history, you'll be utterly familiar with all of the horrific shit that happens to Spain and all the horrific shit that Spain does to other people. And one of the ways that they do that is by building castles. Walled cities are very important, and strong points like this were a design development kind of after Rome. And one of the first things that led to like early castles is the Little Castle. And one of the reasons for this is it's essentially a armed and long-lasting outpost that can warn other larger castles or fortified structures about approaching armies. That doesn't have to take up a lot of resources. It's not very expensive. It can be lightly manned and still be really effective. You just have like a few really fast horses in here, and you have a lookout at the top all the time. And if an army does come sweeping over, that ridge over there, it's not really worth their time and energy to siege something so insignificant for an extended period of time. So you could basically lock and bar this door and have usually slits of arrow holes right over here, and they're often positioned, like this one is, at the top of ridges with really good sight lines. So they're essentially a super armored watchtower, and that's their function, is it's isolated space. If there is a battle...
my friend. I hope you like the view.
If there is a battle that happens in this location, you can often use strong points like this to house like your king if he's like really desperate and needs to escape somewhere, or it can be a fallback point or the focal point of a defensive line. In any case, it's better than just open field, right? You could put a bunch of archers up there. You can use it as a rally point for your troops. You can use it to house cavalry and deploy kind of like over there, and then a bunch of cavalry come out from this area and flank people. It's visual cover, it's armor cover, it's just good to have. All things considered, pretty cheap and effective. You can stay in here if you have good provisions for several months, and an invading army isn't going to wait several months for you to defeat this one small castle before it moves on to your capital city. And if they do, that's great. If you've just spent a small amount of money to delay an invading army for however long they choose to do that. So this is one of the things that I actually wrote my final paper that you have for your bachelor's degree in history. I wrote it about defensive fortification development and the rise and fall of these little isolated outposts, or like almost outrigger strong points from the normal defensive wall of an ancient city that's used in Greece and Macedonia up through the Alexandrian period into kind of ancient Roman defensive fortification structure. I've been doing a lot of 1848 revolutionary research, and walls still work. Like forts still work. If you look at even some of the stuff for World War I and World War II, like everyone makes fun of the French of the Maginot Line, the French defensive network, but they built that for a reason. They built that because having a strong point to go off of as a defensive structure is better and is still a force multiplier. Even in World War II, Hitler was very interested in building the Atlantic Wall for a reason, right? I think castles still have something to offer. Of course, bunker busters and high technology can make that not quite as good, but Earth still works. One of the developments from Napoleonic fighting and star forts is when the technology starts getting better than the defensive infrastructure, you just go back to the Earth. You go back to making mounds and hills, and that becomes, you know, one of the most impressive defensive structures in the world is just packed Earth in a large mound. So, but you know, the thing is about defense is, like, there are bunker busters that can easily penetrate into the, you know, terrorist networks of caves that are in Afghanistan, but they're expensive, right? So defensive advancement is always about, like, no defensive structure is impenetrable for anything, right? They could be outmaneuvered, and they could be overwhelmed with enough money and time and dedicated effort. The purpose of the defensive structure is to make it more hassle than it's worth, right? So castles can be starved out, absolutely, but, you know, if it takes 3 years to starve out a castle, that's 3 years of your life you could be spending doing something else, and it impoverishes your country while you're doing that. Right, so that's the purpose of defense, is to make it so expensive for the enemy to attack you that it just becomes a bad idea. It turns a good idea into a bad idea.
Standing here, you are following in the footsteps of Spanish dukes and kings, as well as every generation of my family for the past 3 centuries. You should be able to see Casa Alfonso from there. When you have sampled enough of the view, take the walk down to the outpost.
Wow, okay. It's just like, yeah, walk this kilometer. Like, alright, sounds good. But yeah, so one of the first things about defensive structure and defensive warfare that we can talk about while we're up here is the most natural defensive structure is a mountain, right? So actually, if you look at Japanese etymology, their word for castle just comes from the word for mountain, right? And one of the reasons for that is in Japan, you almost never build a castle that's not also on a mountain, or that doesn't integrate itself into the terrain naturally of the mountain range, because it's basically free defensive works. It's free defensive structure. One of the first things that anyone who's around mountains will tell you is it's a huge hassle to get up them. And if you have heavy equipment and you want to get it up there, that is a massive, massive amount of work. First of all, you're probably not going to get anything genuinely heavy up there. Second of all, if you do force your men to carry very heavy things up a mountain, they're going to be tired by the time they get there. Anything you can do to exhaust your enemy, and like fatigue is a resource, it's important to note, that is good for you, right? That is the whole point is of strategy is to take a fair fight and make it into an unfair fight, right? And you could do this through lots of ways. One of the first ways is pre-work or setup work, right? And defensive work is a lot about setting things up way before anyone ever comes to hurt you, so that if they do come to try to hurt you, you have an advantage, right? So one of this ones is, you know, it's a hill in the region that overlooks a valley, right? That would be really easy and good for an enemy to come up from there to go up to here, right? And so if you look at this terrain, you have a passway or a valley that is easy to walk through, bordered by forests and 2 mountain ranges on both sides, which would be hard to walk through. And the valley goes from south all the way to north, And if you know anything about Spanish history, there's a large invasion that happened from the Iberian Peninsula, the Visigothic, the Umayyad conquest, I believe, that destroyed the Visigothic Empire in 711 to like 718. That was a large push of Muslim expansion from the south going all the way to the north. So it makes sense that people would want to, the types of people who would build castles, especially in the Crusades, which is when these types of windows would really make sense for people, because archery, so the reason you have this long rectangular window is because if you're an archer, you need to aim up. That's what you want. If when you get like guns and stuff, you stop seeing windows that are oriented in this way, and they start being flatter and wider, more horizontally rectangular like this, because that's how the gun works, and you don't really need that much elevation anymore. But because we can see these windows, we can assume that these were built during a time period where arrows were still really important, or the style had just not changed yet for defensive structures. But defensive engineers are usually pretty smart. They're usually extremely specific to the exact demands of their location. I'm not sure what these are. I've seen them around. I'm not sure if they're for hanging things, but they could be like wall sconces for tallow or other wick lighting structures. I'm not sure what they are. But